Hi, welcome to Garry's Shortlist podcast. Today we're going to have a chat with Michael D. Levitt from the Breakfast Leadership Network. You can catch Michael at breakfastleadership.com. Michael is the author of a book called Burnout Proof. Michael and I will chat about all things burnout from a worker's perspective and an organisational perspective. So sit back and enjoy Michael D. Levitt. Michael, welcome to Garry's Shortlist podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
It's great to be with you today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Michael, all the way from, I know you spent a lot of time in California, in San Diego, but I think you're coming from Canada today.
Yeah, I'm in sunny Toronto, which is not something we say a whole lot during the year, but today we have real vitamin D outside. It's a beautiful thing.
That's cool. Well, Sydney has been absolutely smashed with rain for about the last 3 months, putting a lot of pressure on everybody's mental well-being, without doubt. And of course, our lovely construction industry out there are just pulling their hair out. They haven't seen rain like this for many, many moons. And I was talking to an elderly site manager recently, and I said, "Have you seen rain like this?" And he said, "Yeah, not for about 30 years, he thought."
Wow.
And so, yeah, we've been suffering from that. However, there must be some good somewhere. The farmers aren't whinging about rain. But yeah, I think we've had well and truly enough. So, Michael, absolute pleasure having you here today. And as I said in my intro for our listeners, you are the global expert when it comes to bulletproofing yourself when it comes to burnout. And our listeners may recall that I talk about burnout a lot in my chats with people, and I think it's fair to say that our industry is plagued with a lot of people with burnout. It's fairly obvious in construction why we have a lot of burnout. We do very long hours. We have tough projects and tough teams and everything in between. And I know, Michael, when you and I touched base before Christmas, I think it was last year, to have this conversation. I've been really looking forward to sitting with you, and we've finally done it. So perhaps, Michael, you can tell us a little bit about your background, which I think will intrigue our listeners, which it did for myself, and then we can chat a little more proactively on what we can do to prevent burnout. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So my career has taken many twists and turns. My first job was bagging groceries at a family grocery store, but I loved that job because it gave me the foundation to work with anyone, because where our store was located, we could have multimillionaires come in to the poorest of poor, and they all bought groceries from the same grocery store. And it allowed me to interact with different types of people, different economic levels of life, different races, different cultures. And I'm so thankful for that job because it, again, gave me a great support. From there, I went into public accounting, and I was working for an accounting firm for 8 years and got to do audits on pretty much every industry, which again, paid big dividends for me in the work that I do today and even throughout my career, because I got exposure to pretty much every industry, including construction. So the challenges that the construction industry faces, I'm familiar with, and I know we'll talk about that in a bit. But from there, I decided to take a little dive into information technology and the IT world, and rode that wave through the dot-com era. And then when the dot-com era kind of came to a crashing halt, I thought, let's go back to counting beans, because that's a little bit more secure than the IT industry was at that time. And from there, I dabbled around in that. And then one day, my former wife and I, we immigrated to Canada, where she was from. And I saw an ad in the local newspaper for a startup healthcare organization, and they were looking for a director. Now, the skills that they were looking for, I had all of them except healthcare. I'd never worked in healthcare before. And I decided, what the heck, I'm going to apply. Well, a year later, I found out why they hired me, because they hired me and I was a little, confused by them. Like, okay, I interviewed well and all of that, but I was really surprised that they hired me over somebody that did have healthcare experience. And they told me at a retreat a year after we had started that They knew that I would learn how to do it because of my skills and my background and all the industries that I'd worked with in the past. They knew it wouldn't be too much of a challenge, but it was. And I put in a lot of long hours and wasn't taking care of myself. And that led to my own burnout journey. And why now I do the work that I do today was because of my own personal burnout.
Wow. And from there, Michael, you were feeling the strain and the pressure, etc. How long were you in that role, and how did you pivot?
I was in that role for a little over 2 years. And during that 2 year period, I was pretty much working from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., 7 days a week. So similar to some construction jobs, there's some long days that work in the industry. And of course, you'd mentioned the rain situation. The construction industry, as you know, faces all kinds of challenges. There's regulations, there's costs, there's people not showing up. There's, right now in North America, there's the Great Resignation. So there's a lot of organizations that are just losing people and they can't find people to do the job. So the jobs aren't getting done. And so in construction, I'm sure is that challenge is existing as well, because people are finding other jobs that are less stressful to them. And what I found in my situation was, in working all of those hours, I wasn't doing things to benefit myself. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't getting any activity. My food choices were horrible. I wasn't eating healthy food at all. I was becoming really irritable and a stress case, and prolonged stress turns into burnout. And it all came to a crashing halt in May of 2009, where over a period of a year, the following happened to me. I had a heart attack at age 40 that should have killed me. Then 17 weeks later, that organization that I was putting in all those hours decided that they didn't want me working there anymore. So they let me go. Now, let's go back in time. That's in 2009. That was towards the tail end of the Great Recession that was happening in North America. And I was in a town outside of Windsor, Ontario, Canada, across the border from Detroit, Michigan, where the US auto sector is based out of. And the US and Canadian governments had to bail out those companies because they were about to go bankrupt and go out of business, which would cost catastrophe in the US and Canada as well, based on the number of jobs that the auto sector creates and the sub trades and all of that. So in construction, and it would just have this huge ripple effect across every sector. So bad area to be in, trying to find a job. And it took several months to find a job. Finally, when I did, after working in a new area for a few weeks, I was commuting back and forth on the weekends to where my family was and where I was working until I could move them up there, get a phone call from my oldest daughter and said the bank had come and repossessed our family vehicle. Then about a month later, finally found a place for us to move the family up to in Toronto. And we moved and we forgot the bunk bed ladder for our daughter's bed. So I was going back to that area the following weekend to visit with some family and tie up some loose ends. And I went back to the house and I couldn't get into the house because there was a huge lock on it and there was a sticker on the door that said foreclosure. So in a year, heart attack, job loss, car repossession, home foreclosure. All those things happened to me in a year because I was burned out.
Right. Wow. And you were 40 years of age, wondering what the heck you were going to do next, I would think, and how to support your family and support yourself, right? So where did you go from there?
Well, thankfully, I'd found a new role up in Toronto. And after all those things happened, I realized, okay, maybe the way I was approaching life is probably not the best thing for me. I thankfully I had that insight because I could have easily thought of myself as being Superman. Like, you know what? I survived all that. I'm still standing. Okay, I can take anything. Let's go. But I realized that wasn't the right approach for me. What I had to do was really take a long, hard look at why I did the things that I did, why I made the choices that I made, what was my portion in all of those situations that created my year of worst case scenarios, as I like to call it. And after reflection and talking with people and getting some insights, I started to make some adjustments and how I approach things and establishing boundaries around when I work and when I don't. I know in construction, you've got times that you're working and there's delays. Okay, supply chain situations that we've been facing over the pandemic and even before that, you're expecting, okay, we're going to work on this today, but if the shipment doesn't arrive or there's an accident on one of the main roads and the supplies that you need for the construction job are 6 hours late, there's only so much you can do on that. So for me, I realized, okay, I need to establish boundaries around when I work. I need to take care of myself, whatever that means for everybody, and make sure that I do things in life that I enjoy doing. Even if I'm working a lot of hours, you can still do things in life you enjoy doing. You just figure
Mm.
out what those things are, do them. Because when we're working extra hours, that's the first thing that gets eliminated is the fun stuff. I don't have time for that. I'm working too much. No, figure out a way to do something, even if it's only a half an hour every couple days or every few days. You have to do those things because that gives you a mental and a physical break from the work and the stress that you're doing. Being a site manager and making sure your team has everything they need to be able to work on whatever they need to do today. Or, someone, like I said, someone calls in sick or they got COVID or whatever the case may be, then you're going, okay, well, who can we do with this? Or if you're dealing with subcontractors, they're dealing with all of that stuff. So, like, okay, the subcontractor, here you go. That's great. A case in point, there's an organization that I help out with, and they're in a housing industry. So they provide affordable housing to low income individuals. Otherwise, they would be homeless. So a lot of the properties are really, really old. So one property in particular needed some significant renovations. And that project was supposed to start in the summer of 2020. Well, we know what 2020 looked like, and we know what 2021 looked like. And so there were 4 or 5 different delays to get this project started. The first one was COVID. It just wasn't safe for people to work in close proximity inside a home type of situation. The contractors and everybody wasn't feeling, they didn't really want to do that. Once that eased up, then we started running into the supply chain issues. And construction knows that there were materials we just simply couldn't get. It wasn't a case of, well, I can't find it at this store, we'll order from this vendor. No, you couldn't get them. So that delayed things to almost a year. And then there was, because one of the organizations utilizes union employees, those employees went on strike over some reasons that they had. So there's a strike, can't start the project. It finally started last week, over 2 years after the contract was signed. Now, needless to say, the cost of that project, the scope, slightly changed a little bit because of this nasty thing called inflation and supply chain and everything else. So yeah, the budget on that is shot day one. It's like whatever. We're just going to say this is the budget, but we're just going to ignore that column because that's fantasy land. That's not possible. So we're going to go over to this side and start working with that. And again, everybody knows cost overruns and challenges, but when you start off day one of the project and you're already in the red, you're like, well, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? But again, it's very stressful for everybody involved there. And for me, understanding what stress looks like and recognizing it and feeling it helps me to at least basically do a quick timeout and say, okay, I know I'm feeling stressed about this situation. Why? Why am I stressed? And you start being inquisitive of yourself in a non-judgmental way, of course. And then from there, you can come up with some mechanisms or some things that work for you that you can kind of calm down a little bit or take a deep breath and say, okay, I've been through this before. This isn't my first dance. I know how to deal with this. And from there, that's why you start seeing people that, especially in construction, but every industry, there are people that do the same job and some never stress out or burn out and others are more prone to it. And that's, where you have to dig in a little bit more to figure out why.
Mm. So Michael, in your lead up to 2009, were there what were the warning signs that you were burning out?
The warning signs were I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't getting good sleep, and sleep is so critically important for us to heal the damage that we do to ourselves on a daily basis. We could live the best lifestyle, be really active, eat the best foods, but we still do damage to ourselves just from physical wear and tear of living to information that we see on the news, stressful situations at work or home. That takes a toll on us. So when we sleep, the body's kind of repairing some of that trauma or damage that those stressors do to us. Another thing is, as I mentioned before, because I was working so much, I quit going to things. I quit doing fun events. I quit going to baseball games because I was a season ticket holder for the Detroit Tigers baseball team. I quit going to the games. I already paid for the tickets, but I quit going. And another thing that was really standing out was how irritated I was by everything. I just was so angry about everything. And that's not my normal demeanor, but that's who I became. And, it was difficult, looking back at that and talking with family and friends and saying, yeah, we knew you were burned out. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And they said, we did as much as we
Right.
could.
Right.
You didn't hear it. You weren't
Yeah.
ready to hear. And that's a common thing I see with people. I had a conversation earlier today with an individual. I usually work with teams or executives, but this was a favor of somebody that I had met at a conference recently. And I said, no, I'll have a chat because I, obviously want to guide them. And they're at least acknowledging that they are potentially setting themselves up for burnout, but I think they're a little bit further along in the burnout road than they realize. But they're driven, type A personality, go, 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 go. And I'm like, okay, I've given you some tools. So once you have that awakening and realize where you are, you can utilize some of these tips to help you kind of get back to your normal self.
Well, there's some really good, I guess, some warning signs of leading up to burnout. And I think operationally in construction, we might have really good indicators of getting to that burnout. Working 7 days a week, working ridiculous long hours, and as you say, then suffering with sleep. Becoming dependent on alcohol and that irritability is another really good warning sign. Michael, you do, as you said a second ago, you do work with organisations and executive groups. And one thing I found interesting was we tend to think about, well, I do anyway. I tend to think about burnout at that real operational level in any organisation, but interestingly, as you point out, and through your experience, it happens at executive levels, and the numbers you talk about are staggering. I think. What did you say, Michael? Did you say 70%?
Yeah, close to 70% of executives, C-suite executives, are considering leaving their roles. And that is just catastrophic because, think about this. You've got 7 out of 10, site managers or project managers, or even the owner of the construction company just up in the middle of a gigantic project saying, bye, I'm leaving. And you're like, wait, who's gonna lead? All the knowledge, all the information, because when you're in management, you obviously have access to all kinds of information. You know the project, you know all the pieces, you know where things are, you know all the moving parts, and you're trying to, in a way, keep them all moving together, as close together as possible to make the project as effective as it can be. Because we know the margins are next to nothing on a lot of our projects, so it's a daily grind. I think that's one of the things that makes it stressful is, quite frankly, there's that daily check-in. You look at a project, say, okay, how long is it going to take us to build this building or this bridge or whatever you're building? And you have that time frame. So you're like, okay, so it's a 2-year project or it's a 6-month project. Fine. Okay, great. But you have to look at it every single day. Because if you miss a day, that could cause 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. So it's like you never get to necessarily take a day off from it because you're constantly watching it. And another thing, just as a side note, and this is one of the things that I started doing because I worked for a division of Daimler-Benz years ago. And it was the only company that I ever worked with that at the end of a project, we would all gather together and we'd bring some project members from other teams, and we'd have a debrief meeting of what went well, what didn't, what could we implement in other projects that can become more efficient. We always had that meeting. And it was more of a acknowledge, celebrate, hey, we finished this project. Nobody celebrates the finishing of a project unless, okay, there's a ribbon, unless there's a ribbon cutting for the new building or the new bridge or something, and a handful of you there, but the majority of the team isn't. You know, you got a couple of dignitaries and all that, but usually all the people, all the trades and everybody that work together to build this thing, whatever it is, there's never this celebration of that being done. It's like, okay, that's done. What's next? We don't take time to take in the gifts and the skills that we have in the construction industry or any industry to actually acknowledge and celebrate our efforts have created something that didn't exist before. And I think that's one thing that I highlight to people in every industry. It's like, celebrate your victories, celebrate those things you completed, because that didn't happen by accident. It took effort and time and planning and all the things that everyone's good at. So take time and celebrate. You know, go back to that building you worked on. Look up at that and say, you know, you might remember. Try not to remember the horrible things about that project, but just look and say, okay, my fingerprints are on that.
It's so important.
Just,
so important to celebrate success. And my experience is we kind of do. In construction, but it's very you know, it might be literally just going up and having a few drinks and a meal and celebrating and patting ourselves on the back. However, it's not long after that we're saying we're on the next project. So there's no breathing time to sort of defrag, probably is one of a better word. So Michael, back to your executive work and the work you do in organizations. So can you advise organizations how to really, really concentrate on that 7 out of 10 potential burnouts and what you can do to minimize that in an organization?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I work with teams. Usually it's, I don't want to say after the fact, but they recognize, okay, we have a huge problem here. And ideally, I'd love for them to come beforehand, but we don't go to the doctor when we're feeling well. So it's the same kind of premise. Although I have a specialist appointment tomorrow. So I'm a cardiology appointment, actually, and I'm doing it. It's a wellness visit. I'm being proactive and preventative because that was not fun. I don't want to do that again. But I was getting back to your question, as far as working with organizations, what I do is go in, kind of get a scope of the landscape, see what's going on with things, find out from their perspective what they think they're facing. Usually it's that and some additional things as well, but at least I get a baseline of where things are. Let's say it's the organization's bringing me in, it's like, we're afraid that, you know, half our C-suite's going to leave us because it's a difficult situation. Well, I figure out why they think that. And then I talk with the executive team individually and as a collective and ask them, okay, you know, what's going on? You know, what? And just listen. And just let them, it's like, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to correct. I'm here to listen and hear what you have to say. And then I can provide some insights to them. Here's some things that have been tried by other organizations similar to yours that have helped with this situation. And majority of the time, it boils down to communication. A lot of it is misunderstanding or misinterpretation of what things are, or it's the executive team overcommitting themselves, saying, yes, we can take on this while we're still dealing with this other gigantic project. Yeah, we can take on another one, even though we don't have the resources. And this pandemic, unfortunately, for a lot of executives has been really difficult because it tested their ability to lead without actually being there physically to lead. It was really hard for a lot of people to remote lead. They weren't trained for that. They weren't exposed to that. Now, there are, of course, large organizations, global organizations that have teams all over the world. And the CEO, who may be based in New York or Sydney, isn't necessarily going to be watching over their team in Chicago or Los Angeles, but there were still people there that would report to them and all that. So when everybody was remote for a bit, it was really stressful for people. And of course, it's one hit after another, you know, supply chain, inflation, war. Yes, this pandemic that was killing people too, throw that in there. There was just a lot of things thrown at executives. And just this uncertainty of, okay, what are we going to do as an organization? How are we going to
Mm,
serve our clients? What do our clients need from us right now? Can we
mm.
even reach our clients? Are they still there? Because so many businesses, unfortunately, failed during this pandemic because they
Yeah.
didn't have people coming in. And then, of course, the great resignation, people switching jobs and everything else. Like in April, over 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs. And of course, most of them went somewhere else, but that's pretty substantial to have that number of people leaving, because it takes, this in construction, someone leaves your team. It takes a long time to bring somebody in, get them exposed. This is how we do things with this organization or this vendor or this or that. It takes a lot of time to train somebody to bring them up to speed. They may have the skills to do whatever job you've hired them for, but there's the nuance of actually doing the job in that organization with the dynamics of everything there. That takes longer for people to collect and get up to speed on. And
Yeah.
that's stressful. It's stressful for the new hire. It's stressful for the management. It's stressful for your colleagues, because like, oh, we lost Jim. He was so good at this. And this guy's good, but he's not going to be at Jim's level for 6 months. And what's that going to do to our project? And,
Yeah.
everybody just gets
Yeah.
worked up about it. And that's happening all the time. So just this prolonged stress, that's what turns into burnout.
Mm. Michael, look, mindful of time, I want to mention to the listeners here that your book, Burnout Proof, is out. Where can our listeners get hold of your book?
Amazon should have it. I know I'm 99.999% positive that Amazon in Australia has it. Otherwise, you can go to other Amazon stores across the world, and they should have it. I'm almost positive that my book is available down there. So
Terrific.
it's a quick read, and that's intentional. I quickly go into what burnout is, what are some of the signs. Here's some tips to get away from it. I briefly talk about your worst case scenarios just to kind of set a baseline on things, but it's intended to be a quick read. The reason is because when people are burned out, they're overwhelmed, they're working a lot, they don't have a lot of time that they feel that they can sit down and actually read a book. So that's the reason why I made it quick. It's more like an action guide. It's like, here's the information, go. It's like, and if you need any questions, here's my contact information, and away you go.
Yeah. So our listeners can also jump on to breakfastleadership.com, have a look at your website. I know you've got some tools and some cool stuff there. You've got some references to some interviews and stuff that you've done. So there's some great resources there for our listeners if you jump on breakfastleadership.com. Michael, I want to really thank you for your time today. I know we could talk for hours about this really important issue, and I was just hoping to nail you down today to give an introduction to our listeners of some of the tips and tricks that you've just mentioned today. I'd encourage the listeners to go and check out your website. I'd encourage them to jump on Amazon and get hold of your book. Michael, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the listeners of Garry's Shortlist podcast for being here today, and go and soak up those sunny rays.
There you go. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you and your audience.
Thank you so much, Michael.